The state of Maryland is one of the bluest states in the entire country. Joe Biden got over 65% of the vote here in 2020 at nearly 2 million votes, as compared to Donald Trump's 32% of the vote at under a million votes. And yet, we're obviously talking about this state because we have the potential for a somewhat competitive race between former Republican Governor Larry Hogan and a litany of Democratic candidates lining up to challenge him. Because even though this is an extremely blue state, Republican Governor Larry Hogan was incredibly popular during his governorship and could pose potentially a threat to complete Democratic dominance in the state when it comes to federal elections. So, of course, we're going to talk about the Maryland Senate race and analyze how realistic it is that Larry Hogan could potentially pull an upset in one of the bluest states in the entire country during a presidential election year. So we're going to get into all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Maryland has pretty tough political geography for the Republican Party. It's a very urbanized state. Obviously, you have most of the population concentrated in either the DC metro area or the Baltimore metro area. And those areas alone going blue is enough to make the state very reliably Democratic. But you also have had, in recent years, ex-urban counties that have been more Republican friendly, places like Frederick County and places along the Eastern Shore, which have run much larger margins for Republicans, start to become a lot more competitive. And even places outside of Baltimore, Carroll County, Hartford County, areas that are much redder historically, have been getting a lot closer, because you've seen that in basically every state around the country where you have concentrated Republican suburbs. As you have growth in these areas and as the areas tend to get more demographically diverse, they tend to get bluer. And we're seeing that in suburbs all across the country, but even in very blue states like Maryland, you know, Carroll County, for instance, Hartford County, these counties were redder in 2016 than they were in 2020. And even in off-year elections, we're starting to see that that continues to be the case. These counties are getting bluer. Frederick County was a county that Donald Trump won back in 2016 by around 3 points. And fast forward to 2020, he ends up losing by around 10. So this trend of suburban and ex-urban counties going from red to blue is basically uniform across the entire country. Obviously, this state is no exception. Now, in order for Larry Hogan to win the state of Maryland, he's going to have to form a coalition similar to what he had back in 2014 when he won the governorship here. Now, this wouldn't really be that realistic any presidential election year. 2014 had the lowest turnout, essentially, of any midterm in modern history. Larry Hogan got 847,000 votes. That's actually over 100,000 votes less than what Donald Trump got in the 2020 election. The Democrat in this case, Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, only got about 770,000 votes. And if you look at some of these counties, for instance, Baltimore County, very populous suburban county outside of Baltimore, is a 21-point margin thereabout for Larry Hogan. If we go back to 2020, of course, this was a 62-35% margin for Joe Biden. Frederick County, 53-43. If we take a look at 2014, 63-34. Massive, massive margins for Larry Hogan. Very lackluster margins for the Democrat. Now, Larry Hogan is not your typical national Republican. He's a much more centrist Republican. I wouldn't exactly call Larry Hogan a liberal by any stretch. He's much more of an old guard Reaganite conservative with some more moderate policies overall. I mean, you kind of have to run as that type of Republican to win a state that Biden won by 30 points. But, you know, Larry Hogan is not Phil Scott. You know, Larry Hogan is not a Republican in name only. He does have some Republican policies, albeit he is definitely to the left of the National Republican Party, but by Maryland standards, he's certainly a conservative politician. Now, one of the things that made Larry Hogan so popular was that during his governorship, he shied away from more controversial social issues. He wasn't some sort of pro-life governor or anything like that. He really didn't even talk about guns. He was more so just focused on economic issues, cutting taxes, deregulation, the sort of things that suburbs are used to voting for Republicans for. And that's one of the reasons why you probably had pretty impressive margins in places like Anne Arundel County. This is his home county, 66-31. Again, if we pull up the 2020 election, Donald Trump only got 41% of the vote. So you're talking about 66% to 41%. Now, you can't really compare these so much. I think 2018 is a better comparison because Larry Hogan in this case was reelected. He had a 70% approval rating. He ended up beating progressive Democrat Ben Jealous by around 12 points, and he even improved on his margins in a lot of these suburban counties, 61-38 in Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County 68-30. Now, the reason I'm pointing out these counties in particular is because they're populous suburban counties that have a large discrepancy between Larry Hogan's performance in them and federal Democrats' performance in them, because Anne Arundel County is as red as any rural Maryland county would be in this election, 68-30. Now, if we take a look at the full results out of the state of Maryland, Ben Cardin, the incumbent senator, the senator that Larry Hogan is running to replace, got 53% of the vote in Anne Arundel County. He ended up winning Frederick County 51-44. Again, same county that Larry Hogan is winning by 30 points. So even in a high turnout Democratic environment, he is massively overperforming, in some cases by 30, 40 percentage points over how national Republicans are doing. Tony Campbell just seems like some typical, I guess, MAGA Republican, only winning Hartford County by 10 points. Larry Hogan gets over 80% of the vote, I believe, in Hartford County in 2018. Almost 80, about 77. Carroll County, 83% of the vote as compared to just 57. So you have these ancestrally Republican counties voting for Larry Hogan by 30, 40 points more than they're voting for other Republicans on the ballot. So Larry Hogan is a unique type of Republican, and he's somebody that has proven he can actually win in the state of Maryland. Now, his likely opponent, David Trone, who's from Western Maryland. Again, he's in a gerrymandered district in Western Maryland, so it encompasses the Panhandle and then sort of dips down here into Blue Frederick and also into the DC metro area. So that makes that district pretty Democratic. It's a D+10 district. Having somebody like Dan Cox on the ballot, somebody who is the most toxic type of Republican in Maryland, David Trone ended up actually performing about the same as Joe Biden in this district, winning by about 10 points over Republican Neil Parrott. So, looking at 2022, and this was the most recent elections we have out of Maryland, the governor's election in 2022 couldn't be more different. This was now in a more red environment, but you had a MAGA Republican, sort of an unhinged candidate, Dan Cox, going up against Wes Moore. And, again, Maryland's one of the most liberal progressive states in the entire country. Of course, he gets about the same percentage of the vote as Trump, 32.2%. Wes Moore gets about 65% of the vote. So Maryland goes right back to voting as it normally does in federal races. And if we take a look at Chris Van Hollen's performance, 65.9%, basically mirrors Joe Biden's percentage. Although you have Chris Chafee, the Republican nominee, performing slightly better than Donald Trump. But again, look at these counties we talked about. Carroll County, 61-39. Baltimore County, 64-36. Anne Arundel County, 57-43. Frederick, a 10-point margin, which is basically the exact margin we saw in the 6th congressional district overall. The Maryland exurbs and suburbs are very blue now, but there is a tendency with somebody like Larry Hogan for them to vote a lot more Republican down ballot. Now, the real question is, how is Larry Hogan going to navigate any presidential election environment? Because in this case, you're going to have really high turnout. Democrats are going to be motivated to vote, obviously, and you're going to see a lot more Democratic turnout in Anne Arundel County, Frederick County, Baltimore County than you did back in even 2018. And in 2018, Larry Hogan was able to win these counties by more than he did in 2014. But that was because he was the incumbent governor, very popular. Larry Hogan's now been out of the governor's mansion for a year or so, and voters may have moved on from him. He's been trying to run a campaign as sort of the sensible moderate, the type of person that can actually make quote-unquote Washington work and things like that. And, maybe in the Beltway that somewhat resonates. But again, I think it's still a massive uphill climb for somebody like Larry Hogan, even though he's a very popular Republican governor, because we've seen that popular governors don't necessarily win Senate races because those are federal races. Larry Hogan was a statewide figure focused on state issues. Now he's trying to get into national politics, and I'm sure Democrats are going to try and get him to answer tough questions on what kind of Supreme Court picks he would choose, how he would vote on specific federal legislation. And again, on issues like that, the vast majority of people in Maryland side with the Democrats, which is why they vote for the Democrats in federal elections. Larry Hogan is going to have to walk a very, very fine tightrope. And even then, there's no guarantee that he'll even get close to victory. But interestingly enough, we do have some polls on the Maryland Senate race. And if Larry Hogan were to win, he would be the first Republican candidate to win a Senate race in Maryland since 1980. And this Republican basically won a 2/3 majority of the vote, winning Baltimore, which, of course, is completely impossible for a Republican nowadays. But, taking a look at the actual general election polling here, Larry Hogan is dominating in the polling against the two likely Democratic contenders. He seems to do a little bit worse against David Trone, but he's still leading. And in a state that's as blue as Maryland, as a Republican leading in the polls is absolutely incredible. Now, of course, there's a lot of time from now until November. I still think this race overall is likely to safe Democrat, but again, a lot of things could change from now until then. It really depends. David Trone already has his own scandal going on with something he said a couple days ago. He's shaping up to be the likely Democratic contender. I mean, if we took a look at the Democratic polls here in the primary, he's leading pretty considerably. So, he might actually be a weaker candidate to face off against Larry Hogan as opposed to some other Democrat. So obviously we have a long time to go, but this is a very interesting race that I think we'll certainly watch on this channel over the next couple months, because again, this is really the only competitive race we're actually seeing in a safe state. I guess the only other Senate race that's somewhat competitive in a safe state is Montana, and I have that narrowly going to the GOP. As of right now, I still think Maryland probably goes about 12 points for the Democrat at least. But, if Donald Trump is getting 30% of the vote in Maryland and Larry Hogan's getting 43, that's still a pretty massive overperformance. I mean, that is still a safe defeat. But, I don't doubt for a second that Larry Hogan is going to significantly overperform Trump if he does end up being the Republican nominee in Maryland. The question is by how much. And it also depends how much Donald Trump chooses to attack Larry Hogan, because there's plenty of independents and moderates that I think would vote for somebody like Larry Hogan over a Democrat. It's really just a question of how many and will it be enough to win, because again, I could easily see Larry Hogan getting 43, 44% of the vote, but that's still a double-digit defeat overall. But as compared to a 30-point defeat, obviously it's a lot better. But obviously we have a lot of time until the Maryland Senate election, and we will be following it closely, but I don't think it's a race that Republicans should put a whole lot of attention to, because the odds of flipping the state are still incredibly small. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.